Thank you for coming tonight, everyone. Welcome to Nature Talks. I am Marina McBride. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Nature Nova Scotia. Tonight's Nature Talks is the Common Nighthawk. We are delighted to have Madeleine and Siobhan. They're both two Dalhousie University students. They research the common nighthawk and its habitat and its nesting grounds and also its insect prey. So yeah, I'm very excited. The floor is yours, guys.
Thanks, Marina, so much for having us. And thanks everyone for joining in to hear more about our research on the common nighthawk and their insect prey. So I know you just did introductions, but just to reiterate, my name's Madeleine. I am an undergraduate researcher at Dalhousie University, and I'm with the Department of Biology, and I'm focusing specifically on the common nighthawk for my research.
My name is Siobhan Herold. I'm also an undergraduate researcher in the Department of Biology at Dalhousie University, and my focus this summer was on the insect prey.
So a little bit of an overview about what we're going to be talking about this evening. First, we're going to do a bit of a crash course on the common nighthawk for anyone who isn't familiar with the species. And then we're going to jump into talking about some threats that face the species, in particular, focusing on the decline of insects. And finally, we'll finish off by talking about our research on the nighthawk and its prey. And specifically, we're going to talk about what the objectives and questions of our study are, how we collected our data, and then what we hope is going to come from this research. So the common nighthawk, it's not particularly common, it's not nocturnal, and it's not even a hawk. These birds have a pretty misleading name. So though nighthawks were once seen in Nova Scotia in flocks of thousands, their populations have been gradually dwindling. And in the last 50 years, we've actually seen a 68% population decline across Canada. So because of this, they're considered a species at risk. Federally, they're listed as special concern, and then in Nova Scotia, they're listed as threatened. So nighthawks also aren't nocturnal, and their night vision isn't even considered to be all that good. Because of this, they're actually what we call crepuscular. And this means that they're most active around dawn and dusk, though you can see them out at other times of day. And in particular, dawn and dusk is when they're going to be doing most of their feeding. Finally, these aren't hawks at all. They're actually a part of a group of birds called the nightjars. And another bird in this group that you might be familiar with would be the eastern whippoorwill in Nova Scotia. Okay, now that we've gone over what they aren't, let's talk about what they are. So nighthawks are aerial insectivores, and they feed on insects on the wing. So this means while in flight. And Siobhan is going to dive into this a little bit more later. Nighthawks are thought to live about 45 years on average, though the research on this is unfortunately quite poor. And they are ground nesters, meaning they have really well camouflaged eggs, which they lay directly on the ground, as you can see in this photo over here. And they love nesting in open, shrubby areas, often on fine gravel. Finally, they are a migratory species as well. And looking at the distribution of nighthawks in the summer specifically, we can find them all across Canada from coast to coast. And the entirety of their summering grounds actually extends throughout almost all of North America and parts of Central America as well. And during this summer period, which usually lasts from around May to late August, for the ones that come to Nova Scotia specifically, this summer period is going to be when they're breeding, when they're nesting and rearing their young. And after this point, they'll start their migration south. And as you can see in this figure here, their wintering grounds are actually entirely within South America. So this is a really long journey that they have to make twice a year.
Okay, so as Madeline might have mentioned there about the nighthawks being aerial insectivores, they feed on flying insects. So they have this on-the-wing foraging strategy, which means that they basically open their big wide mouths as they're flying and take in whatever they've got out there. The nighthawks have a very swooping and diving flight pattern, and so they're going up and down, they're taking all that good stuff in. Most of what we know about the common nighthawk diet actually comes from studies that were done in Western Canada, where the nighthawk populations have historically been more widespread. No thorough investigations have been done into what the nighthawks are eating in Nova Scotia, but by using the information from these other studies, we can kind of take a guess on what these birds might be eating and what they are snacking on out here. So the common nighthawk is likely feeding a lot on caddisflies, which is a image right there. It's that bottom left image with the brown insect. These are flying insects that have a terrestrial adult form, but then have an aquatic larval form. So they are found in very high density around bodies of water, so over lakes and ponds. Which coincidentally are great hunting or foraging habitats for those nighthawks as they're diving and swooping over open areas. Nighthawks are also known to eat flying ants or anything in that family, which would include nocturnal parasitic wasps, which is that bottom right photo with the very orange insect. I've got another photo of that bug later on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. They also love to snack on beetles, which are great because they're pretty hearty snacks. Their beetles are pretty large, as I learned this summer, so those are a great meal for the birds. Moths are also a likely target due to the number and abundance of these insects during the hours that nighthawks are typically foraging. They're a little bit harder to determine their presence in the bird feces in these other studies, but it's very likely that nighthawks are eating these, especially out here in Nova Scotia. Insect prey has a very critical importance to the common nighthawk while they're breeding here in the summer. It's very important that these birds have a sufficient amount of prey, especially upon arriving back to Nova Scotia. As Madeleine just said, they are flying all the way from South America down in Argentina. It's a long flight to get back up here. And so by the time that they're up here, they're pretty hungry. So they have to make sure that they're eating lots and preparing for that breeding season. Breeding season itself involves a lot of strenuous tasks, such as courting, which is done by the males with their booming patterns, which Madeleine will later explain a little bit further, followed by egg laying by the females, incubation, and then the strenuous task of raising their young. Once those chicks are fledged, they also have to make sure that the adults are eating enough, the chicks are eating enough, and they have to be prepared for their migration back south. So it's really important that they have enough to eat, that they have the proper insects to eat, and that the insect population is very important to the health of those nighthawks. Unfortunately, insect decline is actually thought to be one of the leading reasons as to why the common nighthawk is not doing so well. Insect declines are very prominent across the globe. There is one collaborative study that has found that approximately 40% of all insect species are actually threatened with extinction. And I don't know about you, but that seemed like a lot, especially when I spent the whole summer outside and was swatting away horseflies most of the time. 40% is a lot that we are at risk of losing. And this is kind of particular, or this is caused by a couple different reasons. It is thought that it's caused by multiple reasons, just due to the fact that so much drastic change is occurring very quickly. The exact reasons are very hard to pinpoint, but the leading cause is thought to be due to the use of synthetic pesticides and insecticides, which obviously directly kill insects, but the kind of emerging and continuing sorry, I'm like at a loss of words, process, I guess, of agricultural intensification is sort of causing the increased use of these agents in order to produce the efficient or sufficient amounts of crops. Basically, what agricultural intensification is it is the increased use of these agents to increase the amount of crops that are being produced, rather than going out and deforesting areas and destroying habitat for new farms. It seems like it would be a good idea that we're protecting the habitat, but such intense use of pesticides and insecticides can just very quickly decimate insect populations to the point where they might not be able to recover. Pollution is also thought to be affecting insect populations. As humans, I think we often hear pollution and we think of air pollution or perhaps littering on the ground. Neither of these are good for the environment, obviously, but they're not always concentrated enough to cause serious or immediate harm. Water pollution, on the other hand, often occurs from wastewater runoff, which is when rain washes waste into bodies of water like lakes, ponds, and streams. Due to the nature of how waste is handled and the dense population of people, this kind of pollution occurs frequently near cities, which brings me to urbanization. So urbanization itself can also threaten insect populations. Urbanization, if you didn't know, is the creation or growth of human cities, which often leads to the loss of natural areas. When it comes to insects, replacing areas with water, such as ponds or wetlands, with human development removes critical habitats that sustain a wide variety of insect populations. So all of these factors, the agricultural intensification, pollution, and urbanization, are likely contributing together to insect declines. And these declines are affecting major groups such as the beetles, the moths, the flying ants, bees, caddisflies, mayflies, and the list goes on. Many of which, as we know, are very important to our nighthawks. Habitat loss is also thought to be contributing to nighthawk decline, but this remains understudied in the species, and further investigation is kind of required in order to declare it.
Okay, so now that we've gone over our crash course on nighthawks and their insect prey, at this point we're going to transition to talking about the research that we've conducted over this past summer. Okay, first let's take a look at where we conducted our research. So for those who aren't familiar, the Halifax Backlands is about 1,300 hectares of urban wilderness within Halifax Regional Municipality. And it's composed of both private and public lands, with some areas such as Shaw Wilderness Park near its north end, or the Nature Trust lands being protected, and then other areas having little to no protection. And so this lack of protection is really relevant to us because being so close to Halifax and close to home for Siobhan and I, it's at a really persistent risk of urban and residential development. And this is a particular concern because while being home to a number of different species at risk, most notably to us, the Halifax Backlands has no nighthawk nesting and feeding grounds. And now jumping over to our research objectives, the big question for my research is really trying to understand the spatial distribution of the population of common nighthawks in the Halifax Backlands, and then using that information to identify habitat characteristics that are most important to them. And specifically, I'll be looking at how their spatial distribution and critical habitat varies between when they're breeding and nesting, as opposed to when they're foraging for insects.
And my research question is to investigate the diversity of flying insects in the Backlands and determine which of these insects are going to be considered viable prey to the nighthawk. Our last objective is to compare the data we have each collected this summer to examine the relationship between nighthawk and insect abundance and how each group is using the land.
Okay, there were a number of different methods that we used to sample and collect our data this summer for looking at both the nighthawks as well as the insects that they may be feeding on. And first, I'm going to jump into talking about how we research the nighthawks themselves using ARUs and visual surveys as well. So those top two there. Okay, ARUs, what are they? It's short for Autonomous Recording Unit, and ARUs allow us to do what we call passive bioacoustic monitoring. Essentially, what that means and how that works is that we'll have a site that we want to sample for nighthawks, and at that site, we'll mount an ARU, usually to a tree somewhere up high where we can get good auditory recordings. And this ARU will be scheduled to record during the times that we expect nighthawks are going to be most active and flying around. So usually that's 2 hours before and after both sunrise and sunset. And we can leave these ARUs out for up to weeks if we want to, but when we do want those recordings, we'll have to go back out and collect the ARUs so that we can analyze the data that's on them. However, there is a lot of data. Over this past summer, the ARUs captured well over 5,000 hours of recordings, which I think is something over well over 200 days worth of recordings. And as much as I would love to sit and listen to every single hour of recordings, that really isn't feasible. So instead, what we can do is we can run those recordings through a deep artificial neural network called BirdNet. And while that sounds really fancy, essentially all it is it's a computer software that's capable of identifying bird species by sound and then providing us with an output that tells us if and when the nighthawks were detected in those recordings. Okay. So here I'm going to go on a little bit of a side tangent about a few of the distinctive noises that nighthawks make and why we even care about them. One of the first noises is called a peent, and this is a nasally call that the nighthawks make typically while they're flying. If you hear this, or if you hear a nighthawk, this is probably the noise you're going to be hearing from them. And then the second noise I'll talk about is a boom. And booms are really unique because they aren't a vocalization at all. They're rather a mechanical noise that nighthawks make by air rushing past their wings when they dive. And this noise is only made by male nighthawks, and it has a territorial purpose. So if we detect booms, this typically means that we're close to a nighthawk nest site. So now I'm going to play a short clip, and I'm really hoping it works. You might have to turn up your volume a little bit. And in this clip, you can hear a number of nighthawks flying around, making those peent noises. And then about 9-10 seconds into the clip, you'll hear this vroom sound, and that's the wing boom. So watch out for it. Okay, was everyone able to hear that, I'm hoping? Anyways, the reason why this all matters to us is that we can use the presence of these booms to indicate breeding or nesting territory. And while places where peents are detected suggest areas where nighthawks are using the area for non-breeding purposes, such as foraging for insects. Oh, sorry, that play again. Okay, but there's one problem. While ARUs are fantastic for sampling the long hours that humans just cannot possibly do, they do fall short in a few regards. For example, the audio recordings can tell us when a nighthawk was nearby, but it lacks the ability to tell us where exactly they are, maybe what specific behaviors they're exhibiting, and it also can't tell us exactly how many nighthawks were present. And this is where the importance of our visual surveys come in. So these surveys allow us to both corroborate the detection information that we're getting from those ARUs, and then also supplement it with precise locations and behavioral observations, as well as nighthawk counts. So these surveys involved heading out during dusk to predetermined spots in the Backlands and spending usually 15 minutes just looking and listening for nighthawks. If we did see a nighthawk, we would take note of specific information such as their location, what noises they were making, and how they were acting. So for example, were they foraging for insects, or what did their flight pattern look like? That sort of thing. And on the point of visual observation, let's take a closer look at the nighthawk and some of the key traits that we can use to ID them. You'll usually hear nighthawks before you see them, so keep an ear out for that nasally peent. And their calls are surprisingly loud too, so they might be further away than you think. But if you do get the chance to see one, there are a couple things that you can look for to confirm it actually is a nighthawk. One of the most obvious traits is the white bands that they have on the underside of each of their wings, which you can see in this image here. And this is in both males and females. And they also have this really distinct W shape to their wings. And then distinguishing between males and females can be quite tricky, but if one gets really close, a trick that you can use is that white tail band is generally only found in males, and then the females will have a darker brown throat patch instead of the bright white one. And so the nighthawks also have a looping, sort of erratic flight pattern that you can see if they're further away and they're flying around. And it's really distinctive once you're familiar with it. And finally, you'll see that they have these mottled brown feathers, and this makes them great at camouflage when they're not up in the sky and they're trying to hide out in trees or near the ground. Unfortunately, though, it's a little late to go looking for them now. As I mentioned earlier, our nighthawks started their migration south about a month ago, and they won't be back anytime soon. But come next May, and for the rest of next summer, do be sure to keep an eye out for these birds.
Okay, so going back to the insect side of the study, this summer we used 2 different insect trap types to collect our samples. The first are called malaise traps. It's that top photo you see on the slide there. And they are tent-like structures that intercept the flight path of flying insects. So the natural instinct of insects is to fly upwards when they run into an obstacle. When they do this, they get caught in a maze of netting within the trap and eventually get trapped in a collecting bottle, kind of secured at the top. These traps were set up for 48 hours at a time, but often studies will leave them out for weeks. We just found that 48-hour period was an appropriate amount for the time that we could work with them. The second trap type was the light traps, and these were the ones, I called them the money makers earlier. They are the ones that brought in very large samples. The malaise traps only would catch between 5 and 60 insects if we were really lucky at a time, just due to the fact that there was no bait on the traps. It just caught whatever would incidentally fly into them. The light traps, on the other hand, were put out at night with this entolight. So it is a light that emits UV wavelengths that are similar to the moon, and it would attract whatever nocturnal insects were in the area. The insects would fly to the light and they would hit these veins on the side that we built. I actually see that the person who built the traps is watching today, so thank you for coming. But the insects would fly towards the light and they start flying in a circular pattern. They would start circulating the light. If you've ever been outside and you see a porch light on and you see a bunch of bugs kind of swarming around it, it's just because they are trying to orient themselves to the light because they actually think it's the moon, which is really interesting. So insects will fly to the light, they'll start circling. Instead of being able to continue their flight path, they hit the veins and they fall into the funnel and they are collected in that big orange collecting bucket. These light traps were catching, again, as I said, nocturnal insects, which are likely the insects that the common nighthawks are feeding on. So they would catch lots and lots of bugs for us. Once those bugs were caught, we brought them back to the lab, and that's where the real work really began. We would take these samples and we would sort through them. So we would sort them into orders, which are the different groups of bugs. So we've got, in these photos here, you can see they've got lots of moths. We caught many, many moths this summer. We also caught some beetles. There's some very large June bugs up in that left corner of the top image, if you can see. We also would catch a lot of those parasite wasps. There's some caddisflies in there. There's also a lot of very teeny tiny insects in the fly family. So we really caught everything. We would sort them into their groups and then we would also count them to see how many of each there were. We would also take their wet weight just to kind of get a gauge on how hefty these insects were. After doing all this, we would then put the insects in a drying oven that we have at the lab. These insects would be put into the oven for 24-hour periods at 60 degrees Celsius just to dry them out. It would give us a dry biomass value, which we can use to kind of get an assessment or get an idea of how much energy they can really provide for these birds. And just for fun, Madeleine and I thought it would be really neat to show you guys some of the cool insects that we saw this summer. A lot of these bugs that you see here are actually ones that were, they settled around the trap. They didn't necessarily fall into the trap, but it gave us a lot of cool photo opportunities. So in that top left corner is a tiger moth caterpillar. I remember being very excited to stumble across that because I just thought it looked so crazy and wild. And the fact that something like that exists in nature, and not only in nature, but in Canadian nature in Nova Scotia, I thought was just crazy. I think I had it in my hands for a little while. To the side of that, it's very well camouflaged, but there's an insect there. It's called a spring fish fly. And when we first started seeing these about halfway through the summer, they were just a mystery. They're very creepy looking insects, and they live near water, and they're very large actually. So we're trying to figure out whether or not these would be nighthawk prey as well. Next to that, there's a very bright orange insect, which I had mentioned earlier. This is an Ophion wasp, so they are parasites to moth larvae, actually. They're nocturnal, and these guys absolutely loved the light traps. We caught very, very many of them this summer. This guy, there's no scale, but it was quite large. It was about 1.5 inches in length, so that's a very large bug. And then in the bottom corner, we'll hop to this. These are giant North American water bugs. And these were by far some of the most exciting things I found this summer. They look absolutely prehistoric. They are predators themselves. They actually will hunt small fish and small frogs, from what I read previously. They were wicked, and I was not sure what they were at first. I thought they were beetles, I thought they were cockroaches, but they are water bugs, which is crazy. From the rest of the photos, you might gather that I really took a liking to the moths this summer. I think they are so beautiful. I will call them nighttime butterflies to a lot of my friends. In the bottom left there's a laurel sphinx, which the photo was very, very nicely taken by Madeleine. Next to it with the orange fur is a pink striped oakworm moth. To the side of that one, it's kind of harder to see again, but it's a very large, beefy moth. And that is a modest sphinx, which is also a super cool moth. Above that one is the blinded sphinx. Again, super neat. And then to the right, in the right corner with those huge antennae, is my prized possession of the summer. It is my trophy. It is a Polyphemus moth, which is a silk moth. They are huge, and I was very excited to have caught one this summer. Okay, enough about geeking over bugs. Going back to our research, what are we hoping to find? So since it's still early on in analyzing our data from the summer, we unfortunately don't have much results we can present to you today. However, we will touch on what we are kind of expecting to find, what we're hoping to find. So from the research, we are hoping to define a relationship between the use of the backlands by the common nighthawk and the use of the land by the insects. So in other words, were there a lot of bugs where nighthawks might have been detected the most? Were these big bugs? Were these small bugs? We're hoping to kind of get an idea of what exactly is going on. We're also hoping to understand if the birds do have viable prey, meaning are there enough insects to sustain the population in years to come? If the fledglings and the chicks from this year come back next year, is there going to be suitable prey for them? Is there going to be suitable habitat for all of these new nighthawks? That would be amazing if they all came back, but we'll just have to wait and see. Identifying the insects that we have caught this summer will also give us a better idea of what they might be eating. So doing this thorough research to see what bugs are out there can give us kind of a better idea of what might be sustaining the nighthawks and what also might be sustaining other insectivores. We're also hoping that from our findings, we will be able to make recommendations on how to manage the land, the backlands, in order to protect the common nighthawk as well as their prey. Specifically, our goal is to identify critical habitat in the area, which would include nesting ground and foraging areas. Finally, we want to encourage local interest. Obviously, if you're here, you have some interest in the common nighthawk, which is absolutely amazing. We want folks to know about how cool the common nighthawk is and also how cool the bugs are too, and why protecting both ends of this predator-prey relationship is really important. That takes us to the backlands themselves. So conserving the land is super important. The backlands, if you're in Halifax and you have not yet visited, we highly recommend that you do. It is an amazing plot of land, and it hosts an immense diversity of living creatures that is honestly very impressive for its urban and centralized location. The backlands, as we have been talking about, are very important nesting grounds for the common nighthawk in Canada, which is a species at risk and needs these areas in order to increase in size or its population to increase in size. But the backlands are also home to countless other wild species, including other species at risk, such as the golden heather plant, which I know there are some people watching who might be very excited that we mentioned that. But not only that, Madeleine and I were out there so often. There were deer, there were toads, there were snakes, there were fish. Porcupines. It is a very, very rich area for biodiversity, and it needs to be protected. It has plenty of ecosystems, including forested areas, wetlands, open rock faces. It has a fire landscape of the young jack pines and crowberry bushes. And it's also used as a recreational space by people with extensive bike and walking paths that cross nearly the entire area. So again, if you're located in Halifax, go visit. And if you have not visited yet, or if you have already visited, sorry, I am sure that you know that we really are lucky to have it right in our backyard. With that, we would like to dedicate a quick thank you to everyone who has supported us with this research, including our supervisors at Dalhousie, Dr. Cindy Staicer and Dr. Boris Worm, the members of the Backlands Coalition and the Williams Lake Conservation Company, as well as our many friends and family members and volunteers who came out, helped us build the light traps, helped us to come up with different study tactics and and even just to be there for additional support. We really are very grateful to you all, and we are very thankful to the Nature Nova Scotia for letting us come on and talk today. So thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan and Madeleine. That was a really great presentation. I love the common nighthawk, and as some of us might know, it is the bird-friendly Halifax mascot of the year, which is pretty cool. I can imagine it was a really great opportunity, lots of fun and very educational to study this summer. So thank you so much for presenting. Do we have any questions? People are feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand.
Hi, I was wondering, thanks for the presentation. It was truly interesting. Would you be able to play the recording of the booms again?
Oh, yeah,
I couldn't hear
absolutely.
it. Thanks.
Could anyone else hear it? I'm worried that maybe
No, I couldn't hear it. No.
Okay, I'll give it another go. Hopefully it works. You might have to turn your volume up. Okay, here it is. Were you able to hear that, I hope? No?
You can hear the initial peent. I mean, at least I can on my side. You can hear the initial peent and then maybe some littler ones, but you can't hear the boom at the end.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
That's odd.
It may depend on the frequency response of speakers.
That would make sense. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I could send out the recording to you, Marina, after, but I'm not sure.
And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think if you have the Merlin app on your phone, I think that they do have the boom calls as well as the peent noises on there too. So if you have it, definitely check it out there.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Madeleine, this is Larry Bogan.
Okay.
I was wondering, in your survey, do you have an estimate of the number of nighthawks you were able to see this summer, or the number per acre, or some number like that?
Yeah, so that kind of ties into, we're still working on analyzing the data, and so I don't have any hard numbers for you yet, though I do know from the surveys that the most that was seen near the Backlands, I believe, this past summer was 12. Though that was a little bit of an anomaly, and generally the highest amount that we saw in the Backlands at any given time was about 6 nighthawks.
Yeah, I live in the valley, and I used to love, well, I do love nighthawks, and at one time, many decades ago, I had flocks of nighthawk flying around my house and yard, but that never happened again. And whenever I see one high in the sky with this peak going on, it's just a delight to see.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I find it seems like when they're migrating, especially in the fall, I think they get into these much bigger flocks. So I'm not sure if that's when you saw them while they were migrating. But
Yes, it was. Yeah.
okay, that would make sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the talk, but I've heard you talk about it before, and it's just so great to see this being done. I'm just wondering, what do you know about nighthawks more generally in the Chebucto Peninsula? Because it strikes me there's a lot of similar landscape, in the Five Bridge Lakes Wilderness Area and Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes and so on. I mean, maybe the whole peninsula is a hot spot for nighthawks. Just wonder if you have any knowledge or comment about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't say I'm as familiar with the Nighthawks in that area. I have heard, I think Marina and I were talking before the presentation, and she mentioned seeing a Nighthawk. Where was it again?
I actually was not on the Blue Mountain Trail, but near the Blue Mountain Summit, and I heard a common nighthawk. And it was at like 2 p.m. So it was an interesting time to hear it.
Really cool.
So I
Yeah,
feel like the site is abundant. The site has something. They like it there.
really, yeah.
I just want to add, I'm in the Bridgewater area on the LaHave River, and I've heard them over the years. But yeah, you're right, lately, not as many.
Mhm.
But I heard them this summer.
Okay, that's great. I'm curious for you, what was kind of the time frame? Like, have you noticed a big decline in the last 10 years or 5 years, or how long?
Oh, probably, no, that's a good question. I was going to say 10. I'm not sure. I'm
Okay,
really
that's fine. Thank you, though.
You're welcome.
If I may. Sorry, I should have mentioned this to you, Madeleine, a little bit earlier, but we were out around the Kidston Lake area in Spryfield around, what was it, early August, and we saw a group of 9 nighthawks at dusk flying and feeding over that area.
Oh, wow. Great. Thank you, JP. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to, if you want to send me an email more about the details of that, I'd love to hear more.
All right, will do.
Thanks.
I have a question. So I know some birds, they get like tagged. You see like the little bracelet on their ankles. Could you potentially do that? I mean, I'm sure some of these studies they cost a lot, but you know, for us interested, we want to know. Is there potential or possibility to put like trackers on them? Like, I'm not super familiar with that technique. Do you know anything about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the technology does exist. You can tag the birds and you can even track their migration all the way down to South America. It is a little bit more of a costly and time-intensive process and also requires a lot more permits. So it is more difficult, but is absolutely something that could be done if there was sufficient funding and interest, that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any more questions?
Yes, I have a question for Madeleine. I was wondering when you last saw the Nighthawks. What was the last? Do you know what the last date when you saw them when they pulled out? I'm curious.
I think I'm not sure of the exact last date. I believe it was late August, but I don't have the exact last date for you, Joshua. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I think
No.
I'm still working on analyzing those last recordings from the end of the summer, and I could get you that date for sure once I've got those
Sure.
all analyzed.
Great. Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to
No,
that.
I'll let you
Yeah.
know. Thanks.
I was I was actually in a canoe in the middle of West Pine Island Pond on the 14th of September.
Oh,
And
really?
a pair of nighthawks flew right over and rolling and feeding, and then but very deliberately, you know, from I think they were actually traveling from I guess from south to north across the lake. But that was the latest that I've ever seen them in this around this area. So
Interesting. Yeah, I
yeah, yeah.
seen it that late, so that's
I
really
haven't
interesting
seen them
to hear.
since. Yeah. Just the
Okay.
once.
Okay.
Mm.
Do you think there was any chance they were on their migration, or?
I don't know. I have no idea, but they were
Okay.
certainly traveling fast and quite high up, and couldn't tell if they were young. I didn't have binoculars. They were too high up, and they sort of did a little roll in the middle of the lake and did that sort of feeding maneuver they do and then kept on going. And they were
Okay.
gone within less than a minute.
Oh,
It's
great.
neat to see them again, though.
Thanks,
One last little view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I think Martha has her hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for your presentation tonight, both you and Siobhan. I have a question really for Siobhan, and that is about the insects. Because the common nighthawk eats on the wing, and that is often quite high up in the air. I was wondering if you are looking at the insects that you've trapped in relation to where they usually hang out, whether they fly high or they fly low, or if that matters at all.
Yeah, I mean, I have definitely also thought that to myself, especially seeing the common nighthawks this summer and seeing them fly so high. I remember seeing them for the first time, and it must have been I think it was with JP and Madeleine, and he was like, "Oh, it's way up there." I was like, "There's no way, it's so high." Yeah, it's definitely part of kind of going over our data, kind of seeing what insects are in there, is also doing further research on the insect types. So I haven't had the chance to really delve into that yet, but absolutely looking at kind of where they hang out, as you said, would be
Yeah.
important to note. They also do, Madeleine, maybe you can testify to this, I guess. They also, they do have that swooping and diving kind of flight pattern, particularly over the bodies of water, where there are often a lot of those dense kind of insect swarms. So from my understanding, they can get low when they are foraging as well. They're not necessarily foraging at super high altitudes all the time. But it's definitely something that requires a little bit more of my personal time to kind of go into further.
Yeah. Well, as well, my friend swims across, Kathleen Hall, who you probably know, swims across Williams Lake every day in the summer. And she reported that she and her sister were swimming across the lake, and they were having a conversation about nighthawks as they swam, and one was swooping across, going very close to the surface of the water, across the water, or in the air across. And I wondered, well, some of those water, what were they called? Water bugs that you found, would they ever kind of touch the surface of the water and pick those up, or?
To my understanding, they are mostly focused on just scooping up what's in the air.
In the air,
Yeah. I think the behavior of picking things up kind of off the water or off the ground requires a little bit more physiology that's leaning towards like feet and thing, or even like a different style of mouth. But the nighthawks are equipped with that huge gaping cavernous mouth,
Yeah.
right? And so they're really just aiming on like scooping things up through the air, as far as I understand. But
Okay.
yeah,
Well, that's great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I have a question, Wendy here. Will you be following through next summer as well? Is it a 2-year project, or do you know?
Yeah, so currently Siobhan and I don't unfortunately have plans to follow through on this project, just because this is for both of our honors theses. So we'll be completing analyzing the data this year. Though there may be other individuals involved in the project that I think will be interested in following up on this data, I imagine, especially people associated with the Backlands Coalition.
And is it my understanding that you never did find a nest? Is that correct?
Oh, no, never found a nest. Yeah, I looked for sure, but I never actually found one. They are quite cryptic.
I have heard them in Blue Mountain as well, like Marina. So it would be great if you could put a plug in for branching out the study to include that area.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Wendy.
Siobhan, where did you find the giant water bugs? Those amazing water
Yeah,
bugs.
they were the only two I found all summer, and they actually weren't very close to, we had light traps and we had Malaise traps set up right on the edge of McIntosh Run at one point near East Pine Island Pond. We had them right by Coal Pit Lake too. Like we were right close to water bodies, and we actually caught the giant water bugs at a site that we called Sightline, which is in a very narrow strip of land. It's kind of outlined on the map that we have of the Backlands there. It's off of it's off of Purcells Cove Road. Maybe it's a bit harder to read on this map, but
I think it's somewhere around here. Where is it?
I can't actually see
You can't
I
see
think
where I marked it.
yeah.
Can you see I drew a little X there?
No, because I think it's on presenter mode for you. It's kind of where Purcells Cove Road bends around. It's before Aaron's Way. It's sort of there's a very, very thin strip of land between developments in that area. And that's where we found the giant water bugs, which was crazy.
Neat.
Yeah.
Wow, they're very cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Martha, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to Wendy. The Williams Lake Conservation Company actually had, this is a second year for us in studying the Common Nighthawk. And this is part of your work is part of our work, and we are working in parallel with you. And we likely will continue to study the Common Nighthawk in a third year as well. So I just want to finish up with Wendy's question.
Thanks, Martha.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you both, Siobhan and Madeleine. Great presentation. I feel like many of us could probably ask a lot of questions, just out of pure interest, from the birds to the bugs to the land. But very great presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having us, Marina. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was an amazing presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Madeleine, and thank you, Siobhan.
Thanks.
Have a good night, everyone.